All right, everyone. I'm going to begin. I'm sorry for beginning late. I'm going to try and catch us up a little bit on where we are in the Odyssey. I realize we're a bit behind. I hope you're enjoying the book. Are you enjoying the reading? Yeah, it's a great story, and I think it's nice that it's the beginning of the course because you actually have a little bit of time comparatively to read. And good way to introduce your university life, reading the Odyssey, one of the great works of literature. We left off last time with Odysseus having landed in terra incognita. He didn't know where he was. He had been used to, in his wanderings, to being opposed by Poseidon everywhere he went. And what we're getting at this point is the story that explains things that we had not yet heard about. So he's going to explain to the Phaeacians, which are the people who are hosting him, about the 9 years of wandering since he left Troy to this point. And once he gets here, he's actually on his way home, because the Phaeacians are going to make sure that he gets back to Ithaca, his homeland. And so what we get, interestingly, is Odysseus telling the story about himself and recounting to us his life as a wanderer, a man who has suffered many hardships. And remember, hardship and suffering are associated with this character of Odysseus, and thereby with wisdom. So there's something that comes, it's also emphasized strongly in Scripture, the wisdom that comes with suffering. Now, if you want biblical books on this, the book of Job is the obvious place to look. But we can find it in the letter to the Corinthians as well, especially 2 Corinthians. He talks about comfort and suffering, and the comfort that comes from suffering. And all of these are not incidental to the Christian life, because, of course, Jesus himself also suffered. So it wasn't just he who suffered, it's going to be characteristic of the Christian life as well. And there's some consolation that comes with that, because it produces perseverance, and perseverance produces character, and character produces hope, etc. So there's a chain of consequences, which is interesting when you think about the Christian faith. You tend to think in terms of Christian doctrine, Christian truth and so forth, which is vital to the Christian faith. But we also tend to neglect the notion of there being a pilgrimage or a journey. Even when you come to faith, you're not done yet, any more than Jesus, when he became mankind, was done either. He wasn't done. And in the book of Hebrews, it says that Jesus learned patience through suffering. He learned something, which is an extraordinary statement. So suffering is one of the problems. I was a pastor in a church for several years, college and career pastor, and one of the questions that always arises is the problem of suffering and evil. It's just a challenge for many people to get their heads around, why it happens, what to make of it. And the only thing I say to people on this front, it's a very difficult thing to say simple, straightforward things, because it's a complex issue, is that the difference between Christianity and other religious views is that suffering, in our view, is something that God himself endured. And so whatever its purpose is, we can be sure that it's not purposeless. That's actually important when you're suffering, to know that there is a purpose in it. You don't know what the purpose is. You might think it's because you're being punished, but it's not quite that simple and straightforward necessarily. I mean, it might be a consequence of something you did that was wrong. Sometimes it is obvious. You did something wrong and you got burned for it. Okay. But often it seems arbitrary. There's no obvious reason why it's happening, and yet it is. We see a lot of psalms written on the subject. It is a ubiquitous problem. Here we see it associated with the figure of Odysseus. Long-suffering Odysseus. That's the epithet that's used of him. He is long-suffering Odysseus. It's used over and over and over. And so something important is being said about this, even from the pagan mind, about the proximity of suffering and wisdom, and what comes with suffering, which is a sort of wisdom. You know, you're meeting the harsh reality of the world in which we live. And Odysseus is going to recount in his stories to the Phaeacian all of the tales of how he got to where he is, and they are stories of hardship, one after the next, really. And I'm not going to go through all of them. I don't have time to go through all of them. That would take a while because they're self-contained stories. They're very interesting. He goes to the land of the Laestrygonians, who are man-eaters. They're cannibals. If you've ever read C.S. Lewis's The Silver Chair, there's the giants there. He's taking that from the Odyssey. A lot of later writers, by the way, will just very happily plunder tales from Homer and Virgil and so forth. The author of Harry Potter does exactly the same thing. So the mythological beasts and so forth, they just take them right out of old stories and put them in their own without attribution. They don't say it's from Homer or whatever, but she's read Homer, and now you've read Homer, and there, as I say, there's a long, rich tradition here. Even more rich than that is the biblical stories that are part of literature. And they start to become interwoven, and there's a dialogue going on, and there's a commentary going on sometimes. Sophisticated literature does that. It makes reference to a previous story and wants you to see their story on top of the other one and have you compare and contrast the two. So that becomes a rich experience. It's part of the experience of not living one life, but living the lives of many people. This is the benefit of reading great old books. You have the wisdom of a wise person that's sitting alongside you and telling you things, and you get to benefit from that. Your life is going to be a certain length of time, not very long. Why not gain the benefit of the wisdom of others? That's to some degree what we're doing here. But Odysseus is on Scheria, and this is a place of a sort of a rebirth for Odysseus. He's going to regain his identity. Remember, we left him in book 5, and he was weeping at the fact that he had sort of lost his identity. And so he and Telemachus, his son, have very similar experiences, oddly. One's a boy, the other's a man, and Telemachus, the boy, doesn't know who he is. Yes, I'm Odysseus' son, or so they say. I've never seen him. He doesn't deny it, but it means nothing to him. It's just a word. I'm his son. It has no content. Odysseus is a famous man. Everybody knows who Odysseus is. Even the gods are talking about Odysseus. But when we find him in book 5, he's weeping on the island with Calypso, who's hiding him from the world, and he suffered identity theft, basically. He has no identity. And what's his identity tied to? Well, his greatness. But nobody knows his greatness because actually he hasn't even got home. His son doesn't know who he is. The suitors act as if he were somebody who they didn't need to worry about, and his wife is just holding the pretense that he might be coming back to try and protect her young son, who is otherwise at risk of losing his life. So she's just holding on. We're going to see the two of them will meet, and she won't even believe that it's him when he says, "It's me." She's not going to believe it. And that's partly, as I say, on her part, it's being practical, but partly it's also part of the process of grief. That when he reveals to her that he is Odysseus, she doesn't want to believe it, because if it's not true, she won't be able to deal with the devastation that will come from that. Right? So a lot of people, it's my final little anecdotal thing, when people are suffering terrible depression, it's not when they're at their lowest point that they're at risk to themselves. It's when they start to get a little bit of hope. Because they've been down at the bottom and now they're a little up, and they don't feel very well. But they know that they could feel worse. And they've had a long time in that period of feeling worse, and they think they might go back, so they can't cope with that possibility. That's when they are at risk to themselves. Same with his wife. She's been 20 years without a husband. This man says he is her husband. She ought to rejoice in it, but she thinks maybe this is somebody trying to deceive me, and just can't bring herself to believe it. Denies it. It seems irrational. It is irrational. However, on a experiential level, we see it all the time. In personal life, people are messed up by life, and so it's hard. It's not easy and straightforward. So we need wisdom to see through that. Anyway, Odysseus is undergoing his rebirth and his recovering his identity here. How? By telling his own stories. And when he tells his stories, of course, we the readers find out about what's gone on. Yes, because we didn't know. But he also seems to be experiencing some sort of, I don't know if the catharsis is the right word here, but by telling his own story of suffering and pain, we see that he himself is weeping. It's not a story distant from him. It's one that it's like post-traumatic stress. He's living through it again. So this is a war-hardened veteran able to master himself, but he can't master himself when he tells his own story because the pain is too near to him. So psychologically, entirely convincing, I think. I think, at any rate. And as he tells the stories, of course, what's getting filled in is all of the adventures he's had, which nobody up till this point even knows about. The gods are talking about him back in Troy and the battles, the things he did on the battlefield. Likewise, Agamemnon and all the other heroes, Menelaus, they would know him as the war hero, but they don't know what happened to him in the intervening 10 years. It's as if nothing, nobody knows anything about him, and they were meaningless. For him, they were not only meaningful, they were extremely painful because he will lose all of his companions. Every last one of them is going to die. And he's alongside them every day. These people mean something to him. And it was his job to protect them. And he failed in this. It's their fault, but ultimately it's his responsibility because he's the leader of the troop. Right? So this is painful to him as he recounts the stories. He suffers with it. So it tells us something about the importance of stories in relation to human nature. It's one of the great puzzles of human nature, but it's universally observed. Aristotle says that one of the characteristic features of human nature is that we love to imitate. And you can see it in small children. If you have children, they act like you. They have your gestures, your voice. They use your words, sometimes embarrassingly. In front of other people, they take on a tone. They physically resemble you, but they even stand the same way. And are you mocking me? No, it's just that this is the role model they've grown up around, and so they take on this role. Stories, even of other people, bring us into the proximity of somebody else, and they make that story a part of us. There's this imitation that goes on, which we love, says Aristotle. He notes it in small children, so it's just simply a fact. But we notice it. Why do we watch entertaining things? Or never mind entertaining things, because entertaining things, you can watch once and that's it. Why do we go back to the same songs and the same films and the same stories over and over again? Never mind the individual ones, but why do you go back to the same ones? Why do you have a favorite one? Because part of you is tied in with that. And the story of the Odyssey is one that seems to give universal pleasure. There's something we recognize about ourselves in the story of Odysseus. And I will argue that it's even more so in Scripture. Same sort of experience, though. Jesus often teaches through stories, parables, right? Interesting mode of teaching. He doesn't give us doctrine as you would get it in the theology class, the doctrine of God and various attributes and so forth. Conveys it through stories, the master teacher himself. So I think we need to come to terms with that. This is one of the reasons I think studying literature is so profoundly rewarding. It does tell us stories that we haven't read, but it also teaches us about ourselves and how to relate to other people often, and about the world around us, hence these encyclopedic stories that we call epics. This is in the underworld, by the way. This is the first story I am going to spend just a little bit of time on. In book 9 of the Odyssey, we are led down into the underworld. I said to you that epics tell us everything about everything, but in particular, they acquaint us with what happens after death in the realm of the dead. They also acquaint us with what happens in the regions where the gods dwell. And these are not normal experiences, so it's not just a story like any other story. It's telling us some sort of secret knowledge. Let me come to this, book 9. Actually, book 9 is Polyphemus. Book 11 is the descent into the underworld. Well, let me do Polyphemus. Let me do this in order then. And I'll blank this out so you don't see this and mislead you. This is not what we're seeing. We meet Polyphemus. I'm going to deal with this story because it's the one that leads Odysseus to have to wander for 9 years. It's not that long after he has left Troy. I mean, it's a little while, but he lands on an island, and the island is filled with figures called Cyclops, one-eyed beasts. And these Cyclops are very odd in their attributes insofar as they don't seem to have any social existence. They live in isolation. Individual Cyclopses on their own, they're like shepherds. They have flocks. But what makes them evil is that they have no social life. And what makes them barbaric? They don't gather in cities. They don't have a sense of community. They don't need other individuals to be a part of themselves. In Odysseus's conception, one of the things that most alienates himself, most leads to his loss of identity, is he's no longer among other human beings. He might have immortality, but it's going to be immortality with a goddess, and it seems to not satisfy him. It's not just that she only appeals to his lusts and his appetites, it's that there's something that is not fully human in her, and that's not enough for him. So the relational aspect of human nature, which Scripture is going to expand on and declare is an attribute of being made in the image of God. Remember, when Adam and Eve are created by God, we're told that they're made in the image of God. So God created man in his own image, male and female. He created him, male and female. In his own image created he him, male and female created he them, referring to Adam. But the two together, not just individually, but the two together also bear the image of God. So there's something about multiple persons, human persons, that gives us a sense of human nature. When I taught this course online, I've taught it online, people are on screens, we're sort of together, yeah, but we're not in the same room, and it's a different experience. It's a funny thing. From the perspective of class numbers, it can be the same. You can have the same numbers on a screen. It doesn't have the same experience, even if you see people's faces. It's just not the same. Very hard to explain, but everybody knows what you're talking about when you say that. The Cyclops are effectively self-sufficient, which is actually, interestingly, this is the ideal of the Enlightenment. 18th century, rational era, is to be on a desert island by yourself. Palm trees and or mangoes or whatever, and beautiful warm weather, and isn't this great, beyond a desert island. Modern psychology regards isolation as a form of torture, solitary confinement, right? But even isolation, if you're on your own, you alienate yourself by being on your own. So when people draw in terms of counseling, pastoral counseling, when people start isolating themselves from the group, it's because they're in distress. They're actually signaling it, not purposefully. It's just internally they feel distance, and they make distance, and okay. But the Cyclops are happy with this, and they have no ship, which is a symbol of techne, and they're not developing in any way. There's no culture there. They have no ship, they have no implements, they have no art, they have no sense of progress. They're not trying to make things better. They're satisfied by living in isolation and looking after their bodily needs. In a sense, they're a lot like the figure of Calypso. Just dealing with their physical needs, nothing else. It's a symbol of perversion from a human perspective. But again, from the 18th century, it's an ideal. Oh, I would love to be on a desert island by myself. Well, when you're in Toronto sometimes, having a place where you can be on your own for a bit it sounds pretty appealing. But as an ideal, the best you could look for, it's really not. You want community. And what we will see in Polyphemus is that the normal rules of conduct which apply in the rest of civilization don't apply here. So hospitality, which is an expectation. We see that Penelope is hosting the suitors, and we hear that the gods regard hospitality as something that is required towards strangers. They put a high value on hospitality. The Cyclops have no sense of hospitality at all. They feel no obligation to do it, and they see people that come into their sphere as prey. These are individuals I can take advantage of, and the Cyclops does. So Poseidon's son, Polyphemus, decides that he can use his natural strength to his advantage, and might makes right. So this is really interesting if you look at this, and then we're going to compare it in a couple classes to Plato's Republic, and the declaration that by one of the individuals that justice is the rich and the powerful getting what they want. That's the definition he gives. It's a very cynical definition. It's one that you hear a lot in our day. You know, the rich and powerful, they can pay off people, they get what they want, whatever. Polyphemus is an illustration of that sort of justice. He's powerful, he can do what he wants. It's just because he says so. What are you going to say? Huh? What are you going to do? Nothing. So then it's justice. Is there any justice on Polyphemus' island? The answer is no. There is no justice. Just like there's no justice back where Odysseus is from in Ithaca, because he's not there. So this barbaric island is a lot like Ithaca. It has no king. It has no civilization anymore. And again, the reader is thinking about these things as he reads these accounts. One comment, and then I've been babbling a fair bit, please.
Just to clarify, it was Plato's Republic that says that might makes right?
No, Thrasymachus says it at the beginning. He says he doesn't say might makes right. That's the later summary statement that might makes right? It's not in Plato. Yes. Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. It's not in there. No, not exactly. We'll come to that. It's a theme in culture in general, that the rich and the powerful get their way and there's no justice. The psalmists regularly lament this. Why is it the rich and the powerful never seem to suffer wrong? whereas the righteous suffer it all the time. It doesn't seem right. They're bad, and they can eat as much as they want. They sleep well. They look after all their needs. They don't even seem to get old because they get to have the best exercise regimes, etc., etc. They seem not to get old like the rest of us. Why is this? It's wrong. It's a cry of injustice. It's not right. Complex problem. As I say, this text appeals to it as well. Polyphemus is going to eat his guests, which is a terrible crime. Polyphemus is going to take some of, well, if you haven't read it, he's going to grab some of Odysseus's men, take them and dash their heads on the ground like puppies, it says, and then stuff them in his maw and chew them down. And the others, the men, are crying out at such an outrage. It's not just because men have been killed, it's that their guests and the rules of hospitality have been spectacularly ignored. But he's too big and they can't do anything about it. And then he pushes a rock over against the cave and then lies down. He has a drink, lies drunk across the cave. They can't get out. Even if they killed him, they wouldn't be able to move the rock. And they would die of starvation inside the cave. They're helpless. Where's the justice here in this situation? One of the reasons that Odysseus is so outraged is not only hospitality has been breached, but there is no justice here. This is a world without justice. When he appeals to the gods, that the gods will punish you for this stranger, he says, what do I care about the gods? Doesn't worry me. He's the son of Poseidon. But he acts on his own. He doesn't care about justice. He contradicts the universal expectation of hospitality, and he doesn't care. He's just simply doesn't care. So Odysseus needs all of his cunning to get out of this trap. And I'm going to read this little extract because it's so famous and so good. Because now Odysseus is in serious trouble with his friends for the reasons I just said. He's too big for them to take on. And even if they did kill him, if they kill him while the stone is across the cave, they can't roll the stone away. It's too large. So how are they going to get out? And they decide to get him drunk. And then while he's drunk, they take a large pole, which they sharpen and heat in fire. And while he's asleep, they stand back, a whole bunch of them, and they run at him with it, and they stick it right in his eye. And you can hear the popping, it says, and the searing, and the smell, and whatever, and of course, and the screaming. I'm sparing you that. In years past, I've read the passage, but now I've given you something to look forward to if you're interested in that, and the rest of you, I've spared it. And he's screaming out in pain at this. And when he screams out, oh, by the way, I ruined the story. He asks Odysseus who he is, because he tells him where his wine and so forth, and he decides, well, I'll do you a favor. I'll kill you last. That's my reward for you. What's your name, stranger? Odysseus tells him his name is Nobody. Nobody is his name. And so when the Cyclops gets his eye seared out, he only has one, now he's not none. He cries out, and he cries out to the other Cyclops and says, help, friends. And the other Cyclops hear him and come running and say, well, what's wrong? And he said, well, nobody's trying to kill me. And they say, well, if nobody's trying to kill you, we'll just go back to our story. Odysseus has outfoxed them with his by not revealing his name, right? By not telling him who he is. This shows how wise and cunning Odysseus is. He will contradict that shortly thereafter because he's so outraged at the injustice and the lack of hospitality and the fact he's deprived him of his friends and cannibalized them by telling him who it was. In the end, he'll say, you asked who I was, let me tell you who I am. My name is Odysseus, sacker of cities. Troy. He's now calling himself by that famous deed. And if anybody asks you who I am, tell them it's Odysseus from Ithaca. Gives away his whole identity. Who can blame him? He's really angry, and he's away from Polyphemus. He can't harm him anymore. He's got out of the cave. I'll let you figure out how that happens. And Polyphemus takes a big boulder and launches it and almost sinks the boat. But even with that danger averted, that's just the beginning, because Polyphemus then cries out to his father, who is Poseidon, and that's why he's not been able to get home. So enormous folly in that one instant of hot-bloodedness, justified anger, and yet it has kept him 9 years away from his family. He's lost his whole identity. So think about this. He says, my name's nobody, and yet he might have got home if he'd stuck to that ruse. Because he reveals his identity, he loses his identity at the hands of Polyphemus. So there's irony in the story. And remember this passage here and the features of Polyphemus the Cyclops. And when we come to Plato's Republic, we'll talk about this some more, the themes of justice and community and so forth. Plato has read Homer's Odyssey, and he's reflecting on its meaning and its significance. It's a story of justice in many ways, Homer's Odyssey, just like Plato's Republic is. Was there a question? I mean, I saw hands go up and down, but they might, no, okay. So let me skip from that to Book 11. Book 11, where I'm going to skip over 10. 10, he meets the witch Circe, who turns men into swine. They give them a drink. There's wine in it, but there's some sort of drug in it, and the drug makes men into swine. It's probably not a warning against alcohol. It makes men swinish. They're satisfied to be just like pigs. And they lose their sense of human identity at this point. I don't think they look like pigs, although if you watch movies of the Odyssey, they physically turn into pigs sometimes. I don't think that we're given any reason to suspect that that's the case here. But they become like pigs in the sense that they don't care about human things anymore. If they're going to be fed like pigs, they're happy to wallow in the muck, as long as they get their food. Again, it's a repeated teaching to Homer's audience that there's more to life than your bodily maintenance, than getting drunk and eating and being looked after like animals. Be men. But Circe bewitches them with this drink, and could have done so with Odysseus as well. He tricks her and so forth. I'll skip over all that. He's told that Circe will be the one who will tell him how to get home. And so he asks her, and she sends him on a voyage. And the voyage is down to the underworld. Now, this is interesting because we're told that the Olympian gods place more value on oaths sworn by the underworld. Not quite sure why that would be. Isn't it an interesting thing? Why would the gods who are on Mount Olympus up in the clouds regard oaths by what is lower as having more weight than swearing by the higher? Yes?
Do they think death has more power than immortal life?
It doesn't over them. They're immortals. So why would it have power? It has power over men. One answer, I don't know the answer to my question, by the way. Not entirely. I can guess, but I don't actually know the answer. Some of the figures we find in the underworld are the Titans, the earthborn gods. They're not dead. They're being punished eternally in the underworld. Is it because there's more justice to the Titans' claims of ruling than their own, which makes the Olympian gods unjust? And therefore, I'm totally speculating. I have no idea. What I do know is that it asserts plainly in the text that oaths sworn by the underworld, everyone regards them as more meaningful. Christians are certainly not going to hold to that. But we will find that in pagan cultures, they often appeal to the dead and to evil figures, shamans and so forth. They're appealing, and the Witch of Endor and so forth in Scripture are calling upon the dead and demonic to give them knowledge of some sort. From a Christian vantage point, this is diabolical. This is demonic. And this is something that's going to be inverted, obviously, in Christian teaching. You don't swear by that. You don't consult with mediums. You don't have anything to do with the underworld. But here, it isn't so. Yes, comment or question.
Is it? I don't know if it's actually true, but aren't gods, despite their immortality, aren't they still able to disappear? Like not die, be like being stabbed and then die, but aren't they still able to like fade from existence and hence kind of death?
No, I don't. Well, no, maybe in the Norse mythology, but not in the Greek. No, they can transform themselves into different appearances, but they don't actually disappear.
Because I've heard of like a case where like a few gods have disappeared because their mortal counterparts, like the Pan, the satyr god of the satyrs, obviously, he disappears because the satyrs stop believing in him, and that might just be someone else made up.
It might be, because here's the problem we have with myths is that they get sort of myths on top of myths that explain why the myths there were like that, and you think, does that really hold true? And yeah, but
if
yeah.
it is the case, then I think it would also make sense for the gods also to swear by the underworld as well, because they do still have the threat of death, and it's still it's not really.
They're not. Well, here in Homer's Odyssey, they're not worried about death.
Yeah.
So it's not the reason here. That's plain. One of the things that this is part of Odysseus's heroic status, though. Let me add this as well. That from this point onwards, any hero, any epic hero is going to demonstrate that they are an epic hero by going down into the underworld and coming back up. Because only the dead go down to the underworld. No one goes down to the dead and comes back from the dead. There are very few individuals who have ever done it. And there are a few. It makes Jesus an epic hero, actually, in many ways, right? But with Odysseus, it marks him out as, yes, heroic, obviously, but also a sort of a shamanistic hero, because he's going to come back with knowledge he did not possess when he went down to begin with. That's why he is sent there. When I say a shaman, you know what I mean by that? Somebody who consults the dead. They have them in indigenous cultures. They have them in Africa. They have them here in North America. You know, the medium and so forth. Yes?
Is Odysseus able to go down in the underworld because he's like a half god?
Yeah. Yes, but that's not even that's not enough. He needs to have favor to get down there and so forth. It needs to be fated, basically. Right? You can't, a god can't, or a demigod can't simply go down to the underworld. It has to be, there's some sort of divine permission that allows this individual to do that thing. But he will pass between the upper world, the world of mankind, and go down into the underworld, the realm of the dead. And the dead are portrayed as shades, by the way. The word is even used, the shades, so that they have a shadowy existence. It sounds a bit like the Hebrew notion of Sheol in the underworld in the Old Testament. They refer to Sheol. It's a shadowy. It's the realm of the dead. It's not yet developed fully in the New Testament sense, where we're going to talk about hell. It becomes clearer as time goes by. Just like in Scripture, there's progressive revelation. No reference of hell in the Old Testament, but there is a reference to Sheol. That's the realm of the dead. And it is sort of shadowy. So there are some slight similarities there for sure. Yes?
In any future content, are we going to be seeing anyone else who goes, like...
Yes.
Who else will be...
Well, I'll wait and see. I'm not going to give it all away. We're going back down to the underworld. Don't worry. We'll be back there a lot. Feature of the epic. We're going to do more epics, so we'll have more underworld. And you'll see that it changes over time. which is also interesting. It changes to some degree in line with further revelation. But in book 12, and I'm just going to say this but not read it, Circe refers to Odysseus as dying twice. So he dies when he goes down this time, and then he'll die. The second time when he dies, he'll go down there and stay down there. But for now, there is a sort of a voyage that he undergoes, and he undergoes this voyage in order to meet somebody. And that somebody is somebody who's going to become very important in later epics, not epics, but tragedies, and that figure is the blind prophet Tiresias. That's who he's sent to consult. Tiresias is a prophet, or is a blind prophet, also a hermaphrodite. If that means anything. Does the word hermaphrodite mean anything to you? It's a composite word, composite Greek word, Hermes, Aphrodite. Two gods, throw them together, male and female. The story of how Tiresias has the hermaphroditic character is a myth itself, which I'm not going to get into just because I'm running out of time here, but it was effectively again, to make a decision. The gods were had a question amongst themselves. Oh, I know I'm going to tell you. Who enjoys the sex act more, men or women? Who's going to decide this? Why would you even ask such a question anyway? But who's going to know? Who's going to know that? Well, somebody who's been both. Okay, Tiresias, you. Both ways. Okay, so now you have both. Great. And now what's your answer going to be? Depending on your answer, somebody's going to be very happy with you and somebody's going to be very unhappy with you. Remember the story of the golden apple and the three goddesses? Same thing here. So he's rewarded with great wisdom, and on the other hand, he's struck blind. The one says, okay, you're now the wisest man who ever lived, and the other says, no, that's it, no more sight for you. Punishment. That's the figure that he gets sent down to. Now, what becomes very interesting on this, if you look at anthropology, and I'm totally going off on a tangent here, is in shamanistic cultures, the witch doctor is often a hermaphrodite. It's the pagan ideal. Pagan sexual ideal is hermaphroditism, which makes our contemporary venture into gender identity confusion rather odd and worthy of note. Yes, not on this topic, but...
Which does he choose?
Oh, I can't even remember. I'm not telling you that. And I don't even remember, to be honest. But he becomes this prophetic figure, and we're going to meet him again in the tragedy that we're about to read, the blind Tiresias, and we're going to meet him before he goes down to the underworld in that case. But where is it? He's sent down there to meet him, and Tiresias the Theban, line 90. The soul of Tiresias the Theban, holding a staff of gold, and he knew who I was, and spoke to me, son of Laertes, and seed of Zeus, resourceful Odysseus. See that? He's both. How is it then, unhappy man, you have left the sunlight and come here to look on dead men, and this place without pleasure? So the realm of Calypso was a realm of pleasure, and now he's in a place without pleasure. Why would he be there? You don't want to be in either of those places. Now draw back from the pit and hold your sharp sword away from me so that I can drink of the blood and speak the truth to you. I won't get into that, but this is how you get people to speak in the underworld. They're deathless shades that can't reason. They can't speak and they can't reason, but if you give them a drink of the blood, then they can do both. Yeah. So he spoke, and I, holding the sword with the silver nails, pushed it back in the sheath, and the flawless prophet, after he drunk the blood, began speaking to me. Glorious Odysseus, what you are after is sweet homecoming, but the god will make it hard for you. I think you will not escape the shaker of the earth, who holds a grudge against you in his heart, and because you blinded his dear son, hates you. But even so, and still you might come back after much suffering, if you can contain your own desire and contain your companions. At that time, when you first put in your well-made vessel at the island Thrinacia, escaping the sea's blue water, and there discover, pasturing the cattle and fat sheep of Helios, who sees all things and listens to all things. Helios is the sun god, by the way. Then, if you keep your mind on homecoming and leave these unharmed, you might all make your way to Ithaca after much suffering. But if you do harm them, then I testify to the destruction of your ship and your companions. But if you yourself get clear, you will get home in bad case with the loss of all your companions in someone else's ship and find troubles in your household. Insolent men who are eating away your livelihood and courting your godlike wife and offering gifts to win her. You may punish the violences of these men when you come home. But after you have killed these suitors in your own palace, either by treachery or openly with the sharp bronze, then you must take up your well-shaped oar and go on a journey until you come where there are men living who know nothing of the sea and who eat food that is not mixed with salt, who never have known ships whose cheeks are stained purple, who never have known well-shaped oars which act for ships as wings do. And I will tell you a very clear proof, and you cannot miss it. When, as you walk, some other wayfarer happens to meet you and says, "You carry a winnow fan on your bright shoulder," then you must plant your well-shaped oar in the ground and render ceremonious sacrifice to the Lord Poseidon, 1 ram and 1 bull, and a mounter of sows, a boar pig, and make your way home again and render holy hecatombs, that is, prayers to the immortal gods who hold the wide heaven, all of them in order. Death will come to you from the sea in some other unwarlike way, and it will end you in the ebbing time of sleek old age. Your people about you will be prosperous. All this is true that I tell you. So he spoke. Now, I read that whole passage because this is what's going to happen from here on. It's telling the whole story. The end of book 24, Odysseus is having got home, rescued everyone, returned everything back to order. He goes out on another voyage. And when he gets to the place where he's going to have his last voyage, he's going to plant his oar in the sand, stick it upright, symbolizing he will go on no more voyages, and he will die there. But now he will die famous, having restored order. His son, the just rightful heir to his kingdom. He's fixed everything. But now he will die, and he will die on his own. But the loneliness there is of a famous man whose arete will be spoken of across ages. But again, it's prophesied here by Tiresias. Lots of interesting things there. But he also warns him about the Helios, the sun god. What's the warning here? Don't eat the sun god's cows. Don't eat them. Don't touch them. Leave them alone. We're going to find that Odysseus' men in book 12 eat the sun god's cows, and that's the end of them. Odysseus can't believe they've done it, but it's too late. He's on his own. Now, this is book 12, but it happened before we meet him telling his story, remember? And then book 13, he'll pick it up again. Any questions here? Let me say a couple more things here. As he's down there, so first of all, he finds out what he's going to do and what he will do after he leaves here, even to the end of his life. So he wants to know that, well, what's happening in the future. But he's also going to go down to meet a few other people. He will meet Oedipus, we will also meet. This is 225. Just note it, and then you can look at it afterwards. When we look at the tragedy, Oedipus the king, we'll meet Tiresias and Oedipus. And they're both down here in the underworld, both famous figures. We will also meet Agamemnon in 451, and what will Agamemnon do? He will tell us the story of how he got home and was murdered by his wife and a suitor, and so he'll tell that story again and say, I hope that your precious Penelope doesn't let you down like that, and that this terrible outcome doesn't come to you. That's line 451, and then he'll meet Achilles. I will read that. because Achilles famously decided to die young and be famous rather than reach old age like Odysseus will do. Everyone knows Achilles. Everybody knows Achilles. And Achilles chose greatness over long life. And what does Odysseus say when he meets him? Let me say, I'll read Odysseus' speech first of all. Son of Peleus, far the greatest of the Achaeans, Achilles, I come for the need to consult Tiresias if he might tell me some plan by which I might come back to rocky Ithaca, for I have not yet been near Achaean country, nor yet ever set foot on my land, but always I have troubles. Achilles, no man before has been more blessed than you, nor ever will be. So Odysseus, the wise Odysseus, regards Achilles as the greatest man who ever lived. Before, when you were alive, we Argives honored you as we did the gods. And now in this place, you have great authority over the dead. Do not grieve, even in death, Achilles. So I spoke, and he in turn said to me in answer, listen to this, O shining Odysseus, never try to console me for dying. I would rather follow the plow as thrall to another man, one with no land allotted to him, and not much to live on, than be a king over all the perished dead. But come now, tell me anything you have heard of my proud son. So, Achilles, the role model of all the Greeks, the one who Alexander the Great models himself after. He has the Iliad under his pillow at night. Achilles says, dying early and famous is of no worth. It's an extraordinary statement. The whole epic is built on exalting greatness, great works, great deeds, wisdom, heroism in battle. And the great Achilles says, don't talk nonsense. I would rather have lived to an old age than be down here ruling over the dead, who matter not at all. So it's really interesting. Like, what do we make of this statement? Totally unexpected. You would never, if this were just a manual recommending a heroic life, you would never have Achilles say those words, but he does. So this is part of what makes Homer endlessly fascinating. Such a contradiction, and such a sense of futility then in Greek life. Right? You have the pagan life that the Greeks lead, and the Romans will follow the Greeks in this, is going to be built on a life of honor and glory, and yet the foremost exemplar of honor and glory says that this is a worthless life. What do you make of this? It makes you long for something more, I would submit to you. They recognize that their heroism, for all of its, they build it up to be, there's a hollowness to it. They long for more than that. And I think it's a seedbed for the gospel when it gets preached. Right? Anyway, comment?
Seeing this through the Christian lens and knowing that they were pagan and, committing great atrocities against the word of God and God himself, is it perhaps, I'm just thinking if, Hades or the underworld is kind of akin to our version of hell, and perhaps
He's going to be called Pluto amongst the Romans.
Yeah.
And associated with a demon.
And perhaps it's because, they lived this life of glory which they achieved from the perspective of the Greeks, through making sacrifices to all these
Gods.
And
False.
Perhaps that is why he's in hell now, and he's saying,
Again, but you wouldn't expect Homer to say this.
Yeah.
You might expect you or I to say this, or a Christian author to say it, but not from their own greatest poet to assert the hollowness of the whole enterprise. You don't expect it. I don't think you can take that away. It's an extraordinary assertion, and part of what makes it so appealing in some ways. But again, it will leave, if you're steeped in the mythology of Homer and regard Homer as your great teacher, and yet he says such a thing, there's a sense of futility in your life. Yes, this is the best I can do, but there's nothing there. I think it does make you long for truth that is more satisfying and seems more just and right than this. Anyway, that's just my comment. I wanted to read that excerpt from Achilles because I think it really is unexpected. He's made the choice of dying young, and everyone praises him for it, and yet he's not remotely satisfied with it. Yes?
Why Oedipus? Like, all the other people he meets in the underworld either have a personal relation to him and like have known him in person, like his mother. I just can't see the connection for Oedipus.
Well, there isn't. Yeah, so there's no personal connection.
Okay.
He's a famous figure.
This is someone that Odysseus is inspired by, like
It
Achilles.
doesn't seem like it. He's just there. He recognizes him. He's infamous. He's there because he commits a terrible atrocity. He murders his father and commits incest with his mother. He's infamous. He's a very, very bad man. He's down there and he's recognized because, again, he's naming famous people down there. You can be famous for a lot of reasons. And he's not famous because neither personal relationship or he's a role model, nothing like that. But he just says he's there. We see other figures down there as well. I've just picked on a couple of them. But it's a very good question. I don't know why. But I do know, and this is interesting, that if Homer writes this around the 8th century, let's say the Battle of Troy takes around 1200 BC. It's speculative, but it's thereabout. That's what scholars think anyway. The Homer writes this around the 8th century, and then we get the definitive text around the 6th century BC. The story of Oedipus is a long ancient story that even Homer knows. So it's when Thebes was young. The city of Thebes is a modern city when Plato's around. It's been around for a while. It's a very ancient city, and yet it's associated with a terrible myth or terrible history. And so terrible that it's even mentioned in the Odyssey, perhaps to terrify us. This is the sort of people that are in the underworld. Yeah, and who's with them? Achilles. He's down there with the terrible individuals. Yes?
Did Oedipus know that he killed and married his...
We're going to come to that. I'm not giving away everything. You will find out. No, it's okay. Wanting to know is not, there's nothing wrong with that. Doesn't mean I have to tell you. You're going to find out very soon. But I don't want to give it away. It's not going to help you. It will impede your enjoyment of the story. So I'm going to skip on from there, but note that he goes down the underworld and he comes back with the knowledge of what he is to do and what he's not to do. Don't kill the sun god's calves, you or your men, and make sure that you do this at the end of your life, etc. And you're going to have to deny yourself. You have to restrain yourself. This is the counsel of wisdom from the underworld. I'm going to come out of this, and I'm still behind, but I'm slowly catching up. Book 13 so there are 24 books in the Odyssey. And in book 13, Odysseus escapes to Calypso's island at the end of book 12. Yep. This is the end of his story. So at the end of his story, at the end of book 12, I'll just read it at the end then there. Remember, he's addressing the Scyrians. He's still on their island. From there I was carried along 9 days, and on the 10th night the gods brought me to the island Ogygia, home of Calypso, with the lovely Hera, dreaded goddess who talks with mortals. She befriended me and took care of me like a pet. And why tell the rest of this story again, since yesterday in your house I told it to you and your majestic wife? It is hateful to me to tell a story over again when it has been well told. So Odysseus spoke, and all of them stayed stricken to silence, held in thrall by the story all through the shadowy chambers. Then Alcinous, the king, answered him in turn and said to him, Odysseus, now that you've come to my house, bronze founded with the high roof, I think you will not lose your homecoming, nor be driven back from it again for all your sufferings. Now I lay this charge upon each man of you. such as here in my palace drink the gleaming wine of the princes, always at my side, and hear the song of the singer. Clothing for our guests is stored away in the polished chest, and intricately wrought gold, and all those other gifts the Phaeacian men of council brought here to give him. Come, let us man by man, each one of us give a great tripod and a cauldron, and he will make it good to us by a collection among the people. It is hard for a single man to be generous, so they give him gifts. They give him a lot of gifts. They give him so many gifts that no one came back from Troy with as many gifts. So now he's coming back with the riches that will designate him as a great hero. Of course, they're also going to be a signpost that he's no ordinary man, so he can't just walk into back home in Ithaca with a big carriage full of goods, or they're going to know this isn't just an ordinary guy. At any rate, the others are pleased. He goes back and he is sent back home. He's prepared for departure. He goes from their midst. They carry him to Ithaca and they leave him asleep on his own island. And when he awakes, he finds himself home. It's like a dream. He goes from the dreamlike island of the Phaeacians, he ends up back home. In the interim, Poseidon finds out that Odysseus got back home, that the elder gods have tricked him, and he's outraged. Oh, he got back home, how dare you? And the other gods are going to have to do a little diplomacy. They turn the ship to stone. They promise never to do it again. They're really, 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 really sorry, and all that sort of stuff. Anyway, he gets home. And again, it's sort of comical. And the gods are a bit of a comedy troupe in this sense. But anyway, Odysseus wakes up, and he doesn't exactly know where he is. I mean, he can think he knows where he is because he's been told this, but he questions everything. He's not sure. And he wakes up and meets somebody. And the somebody is Athena in disguise. In disguise as a young man. Line 221. Now Athena came near him, likening herself in form to a young man, a herdsman of sheep, a delicate boy, such as the children of kings are, and wearing a well-wrought shawl in a double fold over her shoulders. Under her shining feet she had sandals, and in her hand carried a spear. Odysseus, in joy at the sight, came up to meet her and spoke loud to her and addressed her in winged words, saying, "Dear friend, since you are the first I've met with in this country, I give you greeting. Do not cross me with evil purpose, but rescue these possessions and me. I make my prayer to you as to a god, and come to your dear knees as a suppliant." So now he does go down to his knees. "And tell me this, and tell me truly, so that I may know it. What land is this? What neighborhood is it? What people live here? Is it one of the sunny islands, or is it some foreland slanted out from the generous mainland into the salt sea?" And he, she, Athena, reveals that it's none other than Ithaca. He's home. 250. So she spoke, and resourceful great Odysseus was happy, rejoicing in the land of his fathers, when Pallas Athena, daughter of Zeus of the Aegis, told him the truth of it. And so he answered again and addressed her in winged words. But he did not tell her the truth, but checked that word from the outset, forever using it to every advantage of the mind that was in him. So note, he lies right away. He's very careful. He's not revealing his identity. He doesn't know it's Athena. Doesn't matter. "I heard the name of Ithaca when I was in wide Crete, far away across the sea. Now I myself have come here with these goods that you see, but leaving as much again to my children. I have fled an exile because I killed the son of Idomeneus, or Solochus, a man swift of foot, who in wide Crete surpassed." So he comes up with a cock and bull story of how he got where he is, which is a total lie. Totally fabricates it.
Why is she disguising herself from him?
And why is he disguising herself from her? Because that's what you do when you're wise. She's acting like him. He's acting like her. That's what wise people do. They don't reveal themselves. They sit there, they think, they assess the situation, but they don't reveal themselves. Animals will do this when they're trying to, a mother bird will do this when they're trying to lure a predator away from the nest. They'll act like their wings damaged, and they'll sort of jump up, and they'll look like, oh, I'm not going to get away, and they're just far enough away. It's deceit. It's a ruse. Cunning. Yes?
Isn't this somewhat reflected in Proverbs as well, when it says that a wise man has knowledge concealed in his heart?
Yes, it also says, answer a fool according to his folly. It also says, answer not a fool according to his folly, the next verse. So, in other words, it's situational. In Proverbs, it's situational. Here, it's universal deceit. Always lie. In Proverbs, there are times when somebody says something foolish, and you answer him in accordance with it. That doesn't mean lie, by the way. It does say if somebody says this one, then don't let the person who is falling do anything else than fall over themselves. If they want to say something stupid, you just let them go on and do that and expose themselves. Go along with it, sure. Anyway, so there's complexity in the teaching of Proverbs. Here, not. Anyway, Odysseus speaks, and then what does she say? The goddess great Athene smiled on him, stroked him with her hand, and took on the shape of a woman. Okay, so now she changes back, both beautiful and tall and well versed in glorious handiworks, and spoke aloud to him and addressed him in winged words, saying, it would be a sharp one and a stealthy one who would ever get past you in any contriving, even if it were a god against you. You wretch, so devious, never weary of tricks. Then you would not, even in your own country, give over your ways of deceiving and your thievish tales. They are near to you in your very nature. But come, let us talk no more of this, for you and I both know sharp practice, since you are far the best of all mortal men for counsel and stories. And I, among all the divinities, am famous for wit and sharpness. And yet you never recognize Pallas Athene, daughter of Zeus, the one who is always standing beside you and guarding you in every endeavor. And it was I who made you loved by all the Phaeacians. And now again I am here to help you in your devising of schemes and to hide the possessions which the haughty Phaeacians bestowed. It was by my thought and counsel on you, as you started for home, and tell you all the troubles you are destined to suffer in your well-wrought house. But you must of necessity endure all, and tell no one out of all the men and the women that you've come back from your wanderings. But you must endure much grief in silence, standing and facing men in their violence. So note, she recognizes him, calls him a thief, a scoundrel, a deceiver, and says, how wonderful. What a man you are. A man right after my own heart. There's no one quite like you. You're the biggest scoundrel that ever lived, and you're great. That's just like me. Wisdom. This is wisdom personified. Compare this wisdom with Lady Wisdom in Proverbs 1-9. Just compare it. You'll see very different sense of wisdom being projected there. Their wisdom is connected with a truthful and a faithful life. Not so here. Faithfulness and truthfulness are far from wisdom. But again, I want you to compare and contrast. Suffering is a common feature, but not falsity, because truth is connected with the character of God. Not bearing false witness, etc., right? There is only one God, shall swear by no other gods, etc. There's an element of fidelity there, and truthfulness, and there's a univocity to it. There's only one God. You can't swear by many gods. You can't be the deceiver. You have to be true. And that's going to cause you suffering. It's the truth that's going to cause you the suffering. The suffering is in common, but the path of wisdom is very different. Very different. Anyway, he, having heard that he must suffer in silence and stand and face men in their violence, he responds, it's hard, O goddess, for even a man of good understanding to recognize you on meeting, for you take every shape upon you. But this I know well, there was a time when you were kind to me in the days when we sons of the Achaeans were fighting in Troy land. But after we had sacked the sheer citadel of Priam and went away in our ships, and the gods scattered the Achaeans, I never saw you. daughter of Zeus, after that. Nor did I know of your visiting my ship to beat off some trouble from me, but always with my heart torn inside its coverings, I wandered until the gods set me free from unhappiness, until in the rich territory of the Phaeacian men you cheered me with words, then led me yourself in person into their city. But he doesn't know any of that. He didn't recognize that wisdom was with him all the time. So again, something of this as well. You will not always know the comfort of having a God with you in the midst of your trials. She left him. He thought he was on his own. He thought his goddess had abandoned him. She was testing him in this passage. And now I entreat you in the name of your father, for I do not think I've really come into sunny Ithaca, but have been driven off course to another country. And I think you are teasing me when you tell me I am, and saying it to beguile me. Tell me if it is true that I've come back to my own dear country. So Athena has just told him he's come back home, and now he's questioning whether she's lying to him. And then in turn, the goddess gray-eyed Athena answered him. Do you think she's going to be angry? You call me a liar? You call me a liar? Me? No. Then in turn, always you are the same. And such is the mind within you, and so I cannot abandon you when you are unhappy, because you are fluent and reason closely and keep your head always. Anyone else come home from wandering would have run happily off to see his children and wife in his halls. But it is not your pleasure to investigate. And ask questions, not till you have made trial of your own wife. Yet she, as always, sits there in your palace, and always with her the wretched nights, and the days also waste her away with weeping. And I never did have any doubt, but in my heart always knew how you would come home, having lost all your companions. But you see, I did not want to fight with my father's brother Poseidon, who was holding a grudge against you in his heart, and because you blinded his dear son, hated you. Come, I will show you settled Ithaca. So there's the explanation. That's why he's been left on his own, because she didn't want to go against her own brother. That's the reason. That's it. That's all. But even so, note the character of Odysseus is treacherous and deceitful to the core. Maybe less treacherous than deceitful. He always lies. He is a great storyteller. Strong connection between storytelling and lying, by the way, which is going to come back to bite Homer. Plato is not going to be happy that Homer tells lies about the gods. He's going to criticize him strongly for that and say that he's not fit to be a teacher if he's a liar. Strong criticism, but we'll come here. I'm not going to give much further here. Let me just talk about some of the main strategies of the narrative thus far. We've met the suitors already in the realm of Ithaca. We've seen that they're bad men. They're abusing the hospitality of their host. We've already had foreshadowed the coming conflict that will come, because Agamemnon even tells us himself that he was slain by his wife, Clytemnestra, and her lover. And so we are aware that the suitors are bad and Odysseus is good. He's the hero. He's coming home. And because the suitors have been there for a very long time, that Ithaca is very much an inverted world. It's a place of injustice. Odysseus might be a just man, but his kingdom is unjust now. There is no justice in Ithaca. Things have become very violent and disordered. And in a sense, Poseidon, who's kept him from getting home, rules over Ithaca. He's the earth shaker. Well, his kingdom's in an earthquake. Everything's turned upside down. And so there's a great dramatic irony here that in order to fix things, Odysseus has to disguise himself in order to turn everything right side up and to restore justice. He can't just walk in as he is. It's very much of a North American ideal, is to be a man of your word and to be straight in your talk, no beating around the bush, talk straight. That's not going to work here. Because if he comes home, he's one man, and they are hundreds, and they're gonna mow him down. They'll be ready, waiting for him. They have no reason to welcome him home. And so he's going to come back, and not only is he going to come back, he's going to be disguised as a beggar. And some of the scenes, which I will look at next time, are famous scenes where he is doing his best to disguise himself, and yet the disguise slips a bit. We'll deal with a couple of those instances. But what he's doing here is not only allowing himself to survive, he is testing the people of Ithaca. So injustice now rules over the kingdom of Ithaca. It's a bad place. It's a bit like, I don't mean the parallel to be drawn too strongly, but it's like Sodom in the sense that it's a disordered world, and yet not everybody there is bad in it. And so there's, Abraham is saying, well, hold on, if there's just 50 righteous people here, you're not going to do that. No. And there's this negotiation going. But the question is, yes, the whole city as a whole is as bad as can be, but is everybody in the city that bad? No. Odysseus is going to test whether everyone in Ithaca is as bad as it appears they are, because justice has his hands tied here. There's no justice in this kingdom. It looks like nobody's good. But it's not quite as bad as it appears. He's going to test it. He knows that if the bad guys are in charge, the good guys tend to keep the mouth shut and just sit there and wait. They're being wise. They're waiting for their moment. And he's going to test to see who's really bad and who isn't. That's what's going to go on here. That's part of the process of wisdom here, is him discerning here. And he will start with the lowest character in the social rank. His name is Eumaeus, the swineherd. He looks after the pigs. I'll pick up his story next time.